Good evening. My name is Michael Popa, the Executive Director of Mainstream Coalition, and thanks so much for being here with us tonight. Before we begin, I would just like to point out we do have a closed caption service turned on for this webinar. If you're not seeing the closed captions, just click the CC or closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. You may have to swipe over if you're on a mobile phone, and then click show subtitle, and you should be able to see the closed captions somewhere on your screen. Again, Michael Popa, Executive Director, Mainstream Coalition, and welcome to the first in a planned series of conversations designed for members of Mainstream. It's a benefit and it's in gratitude for your support. We've opened this first event up to the general public, both because the topic is extremely important and also to encourage those who are not members to check out Mainstream and consider joining and helping us in future efforts. The Mainstream Coalition was founded by, among others, sitting Kansas state representatives from both parties, and over its 26-year history has always put issues important to Kansans over any one political view. But in today's incredibly polarized climate, even we have struggled to find consensus across the aisle. We welcome the insights of tonight's guests and into how we move forward on the road ahead. And it's even more important to, especially to me this week, after the week I've had. I don't know about you, but I've looked forward to this tonight because there's been many times that I have not seen eye to eye with somebody. We'll just put it that way. We're very excited. We're very grateful for you, our guests tonight as well. But to introduce them, first, I'm going to introduce tonight's moderator, Brandon Kenig. Brandon is a member of the Board of Directors of Mainstream Coalition. He's a former Shawnee City Council Member and co-host of the Two Men in the Middle podcast. He's a political consultant who has worked on numerous campaigns at the federal, state, and congressional levels, as well as a presidential campaign or two. And he participated in get out the vote efforts for national political campaigns for elections in Canada and the United Kingdom, as well as working as a staffer for US Senator Jerry Moran. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that introduction.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for being here tonight. And I'm going to apologize to Danny, who is actually running tech for us in the background. There's a poll that I wanted to do, and I was supposed to do it before I introduced you, Brandon, but now we get to do it together.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay, excellent. So this is a poll, just a quick survey for everyone watching tonight. We want to know where you're coming from, right? So I think I just launched the poll. Everyone should see it on the screen. It is 4 easy questions, and then I'll share the results. They are 100% anonymous. So go ahead and choose what best suits you or fits you. I'm not seeing that anyone's voted yet. Okay, and I am getting a message that no one sees the poll. What about now? Do we see the poll?
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. There's that elusive poll. Again, these questions are 100% anonymous. Just like to get an idea of party affiliation of those in the room attending tonight, how we identify politically, and how we feel about, speaking with others or having conversations about things that we may not agree on. And either, I don't know, Brandon, if you can see the answers coming in, either everyone's voting really fast or they're answering really fast, or there's a backlog and they're just coming in really fast. But we're almost there. All right, anything on here, Brandon? Can you see results right now, or is it just me?
No, I think it's just you. I can't.
Because I've never used the poll before, so I don't know.
Okay. Yep.
All right. So it's coming in that you've seen some questions here. What's the best? Which best defines your political identity? It looks like most people are kind of in the middle. Most people are mainstream, if you will, right? It looks like we have a pretty good cross section though of people here with us this evening. So I'm really excited. I'm gonna go ahead and share these results that we have right now.
Excellent.
So we can all see them. And I guess you just have to kind of scroll through to see all of them.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see the cross section when it comes to political identity, religious faith. And it seems to be a very consensus around being able to have conversations with others too, whom you disagree with. And I think that's going to be the key takeaway here, is being able to know how we can then leave this presentation, go out into the community, be able to build those bridges that need to be built after a very turbulent election cycle.
Right. I agree 100%. I was really pleased to see that 80% of the people here tonight think they can be in a room and have discussions with people that they may not agree with 100%. And at that, I'm going to jump off screen because I'm sure people are already sick of looking at my face, and let you introduce our amazing panelists this evening. So thank you again, Brandon, for being here, and look forward to this discussion.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for having me here. I am very excited to introduce our star-studded panel. We have a fantastic group of panelists tonight representing a cross-section of the community who are in politics, who are in our communities on the ground, speaking to voters, speaking to fellow residents. And so without further ado, I will begin with introductions. So I'd like to first introduce Representative Sharice Davids. Congresswoman Davids is the sitting representative from the 3rd Congressional District in Kansas, first elected in 2018 and re-elected in 2020. A resident of Roland Park, she is one of the first 2 Native American women to serve in Congress, and she sits on the Transportation and Infrastructure and Small Business Committees. She was raised by a single mother and worked her way through college at JCCC, UMKC, and Cornell Law School. And she has centered her career in Congress on bringing more opportunities to the middle class. Welcome, Congresswoman. Second, I'd like to introduce Reverend Adam Hamilton. He is the founding pastor of the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. He's a Kansas City native, and he launched the Church of the Resurrection with his wife and children in 1990. And since then, the church has grown to over 22,000 adults and children under his leadership, multiple locations, 5 locations around the metro. It is the largest United Methodist church in the United States. And the congregation has a 3-fold focus: connecting with thinking people, inviting them to become followers of Christ, engaging in acts of justice and mercy in the community, and working to renew the United Methodist Church. Pastor Hamilton is also author of over 30 books and has received nationwide recognition for his work in racial reconciliation, leadership, civility, and community service. Welcome, Reverend. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Barbara Bolier. Dr. Bollier is the former Kansas State Senator Representative and was a 2020 U.S. Senate candidate. She's the daughter of a doctor and a nurse, and she grew up in Fairway and Mission Hills and has attended Kansas public schools her entire life. Graduated from KU and earned a medical degree from the University of Kansas School of Medicine. In 2010, after serving as a doctor, Barbara served in the Kansas House of Representatives, and then in 2016 in the Kansas Senate. And she earned a reputation in the state Senate as a leader willing to stand up to both parties and be an independent voice for her constituents. She's active in the education community and has served on the Shawnee Mission Education Foundation Board. Welcome, Dr. Bollier. And then lastly, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Sharp. Stephanie Sharp was elected 3 times to the Kansas House of Representatives, twice to the Johnson County Community College Board. Her personal expertise is translating politics into English for state and local candidates and organizations. She created votesharp.biz, which is a voter relationship and management tool to track voter interactions. She has advised nonprofits, advocacy organizations, legislative and local campaigns for more than 20 years. It's rare to find a candidate in Kansas running for local or statewide office, state legislature, that doesn't know Stephanie. and she is a frequent presenter on effective voter and policymaker engagement. So welcome, Stephanie. So before we begin, I'd like to just let everybody know the format and how this panel discussion is going to proceed. So we have a number of themes we'd like to discuss tonight and give all of our panelists a chance to engage and interact on those themes. So I will be presenting questions. There is the opportunity for registrants to also submit questions as well, which we will get to if time allows. We also have questions that were submitted beforehand by registrants, which I have and will be including in the questions that I ask as well. So with our first theme, I'm going to direct a specific question to each panelist, just so we can start by giving each panelist an opportunity to speak. And then after we go through that first round of questioning for each panelist, we will move into a mix of questions, some of which will be panelist specific and others that will be broad and available for any of the panelists to answer. And so when we move into some of those broad questions, where I don't call on a panelist directly, any of the panelists can raise their hand, let me know that they choose to answer that question, and we will proceed. So it'll be a free flow format with questions that are panelist specific, as well as those that are for the entire panel to answer and provide insight. So to start, I'd like to begin. There's so much to unravel coming off of 2020, not just politically, but a year where we were frozen in time in many aspects, quarantined away from family and friends, and trying to overlay that with a general election and a presidential election. So one of the takeaways from the election and the aftermath of the 2020 presidential election was just the significant polarization that has gripped America and Kansas in general. The impact of tribalism on our communities, on our relationships with friends and family, on elections and on governing, and how that has seeped into everyday life. And there is really no way to escape it. And one of the complaints that I hear most often from people who are even not very politically attuned is the fact that they are just so frustrated with the tone and the tenor of politics. And it's redundant to say that we are a tale of two Americas in many ways, but that really has come home to roost this year more than ever. So around that topic of tribalism and polarization and this almost stuck in neutral tendency we find ourselves in, I want to direct the first question on that topic to Pastor Hamilton. As a pastor who's out there in the community, who is in a role that's different from the rest of the panel in many aspects because you're in a very non-political role, how have you found it over the past 12 to 16 months? Have you found it more difficult to preach the gospel, to be able to speak to moral truths with clarity while staying out of the political fray? Have you noticed, even within your congregation and your flock, the difficulty it is to speak without having something become politicized and trying to stay out of politics so that your message resonates? What has that experience been in this election cycle for you compared to, I would say, past elections?
Well, thank you, Brad. Great question. And I'm getting some feedback. I don't know if that's, there we go. Perfect. So I would say, first of all, I've pastored Church of the Resurrection for 30 years, and I've watched the polarization increase over that period of time. But it's not new for this year. I think this year, one of your later questions may be around how COVID has impacted this. And I think when people are not able to see each other's faces, they're not sitting with each other, having coffee after church or in Sunday school, it's easy to dehumanize the other person. It's easy to only see an issue and not see people. And so I think it has been harder this year. I think our social distancing has made that harder. But, part of what we recognize when we're talking, so people, anytime I preach on something and it disagrees with their particular vantage point, I'm being too political. And what I find interesting is that when we ask, well, what's political? Like everything that we describe as political has a moral or ethical dimension to it. And every moral and ethical dimension, issue or dimension has behind that our set of assumptions about how the world works and what's right and wrong. And so underneath all of those is our faith questions or religious questions. So for me, when we look at immigration or climate change or poverty or racism or minimum wage or incarceration or the death penalty or stem cell research or abortion or inclusivity, all of those somehow have a religious dimension to them. And if religious leaders aren't willing to speak about those things, then what is shaping our understanding of these things? Is it 60-second political commercials? Is it, where are we getting the sense of right or wrong? So what I found with my congregation, one of the questions that I have to ask, and it's not my congregation, but the congregation I serve, one of the questions I have to ask when I'm addressing these topics, and I address them fairly regularly, but it's not every Sunday we're going to talk about controversial issues. Nobody wants to talk about controversy all the time. We want to be built up, and we have our spiritual needs that need to be met, but you got to talk about these things too. And when you do, the question that I have to ask is, do I want to irritate people or influence them? And it's really easy to irritate people. It just takes no skill to poke people in the eye and to irritate them. It takes real skill and a lot of work to influence people. And in order to influence people, I have to understand where are different people coming from, because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to be wrong about a moral issue, or I want to hold the wrong view of some political issue. Everybody thinks they're holding the right view for the right reasons. And so somewhere being able to understand whatever that issue might be, why does somebody hold that view? A thoughtful person hold that view. And then how can I speak about this in a way that helps people hear? And there's a couple of principles that I think about in Scripture. One of those is where James says, "Be quick to listen and slow to speak." Or some people note that we got 2 ears and 1 mouth from God in direct proportion to how much we should use them. And so being able to listen to people and understand where are they coming from, and when I meet somebody who has an opinion that's so different from my own, to say, well, help me understand why you hold that view. And when I listen and I can recite back where they're coming from, it opens the door for somebody to be able to listen when I, with humility, offer a viewpoint that might be different from theirs. And I also think about the book of Proverbs. It says a gentle answer turns away wrath. And we've kind of forgotten that this year because we're not with people. So we're using social media and we give people zingers. We think about that perfect 240 character zinger on Twitter that will get back, and say what we think is true. Twitter's a terrible means of having meaningful conversations about anything. So is really Facebook. And so we do this, and as opposed to having a gentle answer that turns away wrath, we zing people and just irritate them and make them mad. And they come back with another zinger, and we're just zinging back and forth. And we contribute to, even thoughtful people like the folks in the Mainstream Coalition, sometimes we contribute to this because we feel our anger built up and we just let people have it. And I think, somewhere in there, this idea, and I teach this to our congregation, we got to remember, Jesus said the second most important commandment of all, and it comes from the Hebrew Bible, is love your, well, in the Hebrew Bible, it's not the second most commandment, but love your neighbor. And then Jesus says, even love your enemy. And Paul says, don't return evil for evil, and there's just all these things in Scripture, do unto others, the golden rule, like all of this points towards the keys to being able to depolarize and to check ourselves. But if pastors are not reminding people of that too, and we're not practicing that, then who's going to do it? And so it's just really hard work. But yeah, we regularly talk about hard things. And I have gotten numerous, honestly, anytime we address these issues, people leave. And as a pastor who wants people to like you, this is the reality of anybody who's a pastor. You're standing up in front of people and you're hoping people think, you're okay. And when you get the letter saying, I hate you and I'm never coming back, or I can't believe you're such a heretic or whatever, that's just painful. And so you've got to be able to have enough courage to say, I have to talk about these things, even though they're hard, but I want to talk about them in a way that helps people hear. And to do that, I also have to listen.
Those are great points, Pastor. And I think the act of active listening and being able to hear others out, the ability to still speak with clarity and conviction and recognize that everything may be politicized and there's nothing you can do to prevent that. So in that same vein, I'd like to ask a question of Congresswoman Davids. Active listening is something that's key for you serving as a member of Congress, particularly the 3rd District. Since you represent a district that's a swing district, has gone back and forth between Democratic and Republican representation. And as a representative of the 3rd District voters, you need to have Republicans and unaffiliated voters in addition to Democrats. You can't win with just Democratic support. So what does that mean for you in terms of active listening with your constituents, and how do you straddle that line of being a representative of your party, but also a representative of your district, and ensuring that you are independently representing and voting your district at a time when the parties are more polarized than ever, and there's this constant pressure to toe the party line, as we see in DC?
Well, that's a really good question. I think that a couple of things. One, I could feel myself. I don't know what happened. Maybe tense up or something when you said a representative of a party and of the 3rd district, because I'm just a representative of the 3rd district, and I think that that's like when with that as the starting point. When I decided to run for office, it's a lot of it stemmed. Well, there were a couple of things, but the reason that I felt empowered enough to do it is because I felt I had a lot of faith in the people of our district to move in a direction of progress, and I think that that's what we've seen in our area. And when I say progress, I don't even know that I'm talking about a specific policy. What I'm thinking about is like, how do we grow? How do we connect? How do we try to do what's going to be best for our community? And in fact, the folks that are on the panel tonight are great examples of that. And I actually, when Pastor Hamilton was saying that he asks himself, do I want to influence or do I want to irritate? Maybe more members of Congress or state legislators should ask themselves that as well. And even though it's, in my view, it's not really the role of a legislator to influence when it comes to the folks at home, when it comes to the folks that you're supposed to be representing. Your job there is to listen. But when I'm here in DC and I'm trying to move forward with what the voices in our community have been saying, then that's when the influence or irritate role comes into it. So I think that probably the idea of listening permeates most of the work that all of us do. First of all, I'm a copious note taker. So that's one piece. It helps me stay engaged and be really thinking and not spending that time, the 2 ears, one mouth line. It helps me stay engaged and really be showing up to listen, to learn, so that I can then bring that voice and information and advocacy out to DC. And I think the people in the 3rd district appreciate that. I think that even on topics, some hot button topics too, that folks disagree with either a position I've taken, a vote I've taken. I have found, and I can't speak to what it's like for other members in the House, but what I've found is that when I show up to places, even when somebody disagrees with me on something, which happens fairly regularly, it could be that they're, hey, I didn't like that you voted for this thing or that thing, but I'm glad you're working on bringing down the cost of prescription drugs, and first of all, as a person whose role is to bring that voice to Washington, I have to make sure that I'm not, that I don't immediately get defensive. And I think the pastor was also touching on that. It's very interesting how many similarities there are here. That you got to be willing to listen to folks and like actually hear them, not listen so that you can respond. And I think that the people in our community have really appreciated that at least for the couple of years that I've been doing this.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Yeah, and several good points are about active listening, and that should be the hallmark of a good legislator representing the people. So in that same vein, regarding listening and taking note of what people are saying around us, the messaging, and as that comes to the top, one of the disturbing trend lines we've seen has been the increase in disinformation and the corrosive effect that can have on our communities, on the ability to govern. It contributes to the polarization that's at an all-time high. So I'd like to direct this question to Dr. Bollier. And Doctor, you had the unique experience of having served in the State House in Kansas, and then having run a statewide campaign for the US Senate. And I think during that time, I'm sure you've noticed the shift as we've become not only more polarized, but the vitriol and the language around political identity has also just, become very much out of hand. I'm curious to know, kind of in your campaign this past year, what was did you experience that disinformation firsthand? That was at an all-time high in 2020, and we like to think of it nationally in terms of, we know what QAnon is, we know, the election fraud, the big lie at the presidential level, but there was a lot of disinformation that filtered down to the state level within our communities. And I think those candidates who are campaigning on the ground experienced it firsthand. Did you notice or experience any of that disinformation, and what type of effect did that have on you as you were running for office and trying to get the truth out and to speak and run a statewide campaign in the face of any disinformation that may have been out there, at least here in Kansas?
What a question. I wish I could answer it differently, because it certainly, by my opponent, should have been answered differently, because I ran an honest, truthful campaign. That was my goal, and I'm very proud of that and have always done that anytime I run for office. But no, it was really pretty much the lie of the week from Roger Marshall. What a sad thing to have a fellow physician spread not misinformation. Misinformation is not understanding information. Disinformation is purposeful false information. And, here I am. I mean, it's about to make me cry, because so disappointing to see a fellow physician and a Kansan and someone that wants to represent the people not be truthful. And it's interesting because I was hearing the other day a person saying, when are we going to be able to get rid of the modifier? Actual facts, real truth. It is facts and truth. It should be. And now we have to put a modifier in. And I certainly, it happened throughout the entire campaign. I even stood next to my opponent at a debate in Wichita. We were asked a very similar question, and his answer was lies, lies, and more lies. We all know that's what it's all about. Well, no, it's not, and it shouldn't be. And we should be expecting better from our candidates and from who we vote for and our actual leaders. So I look forward to the day that those who are now elected start speaking out and actually promoting truth and reality, and not just criticizing. When we swear on the Bible, when we're under oath, we say the truth, the whole truth. Just giving part of information isn't really the truth. And I learned that as a kid. I got punished if I didn't tell the whole truth. And we need to do those things. And I think it's very important for us. And I believe that we can, by doing that very thing that both the Congresswoman and the Reverend spoke of, is listening, not to respond to one another, but to understand one another. We have a long way to go. And my call tonight, just as we talk, is for all of us to really reach out to those who are in leadership roles, not just focus on issues, but beg them to become honest, truthful, and follow those things. It really does make a difference. We want our kids growing up that way. That's what I know.
Thank you, Dr. Bollier. And I'm very glad you made that distinction between disinformation and misinformation, because I think that is key, because one is deliberate and intentional versus, just giving out the wrong information. And I think we need to be able to differentiate between the two. So in that mindset, I'd like to direct a question to Stephanie Sharp. Stephanie, you assist many candidates and have for many years in campaign strategy and on-the-ground engagement with voters. You have a revolutionary app that does that, and you've been able to talk to candidates and listen and learn what they hear on the front lines of voter engagement and what's happening. And I'm curious to hear the feedback that you've had from the candidates that you've worked with, particularly in this last election cycle, how things were different. Now, we know there wasn't a lot of on-the-ground voter engagement due to the pandemic. So a lot of it was done via phone, via email, via digital, those engagement touch points. But one refrain that I've heard from many candidates is that our elections have become nationalized to a degree now. Many candidates for state legislature and for on down the city council have been asked about their support for or against President Trump. And wanting to just know their party affiliation immediately, even if they're, city council or school board. Have you noticed that? And has that been an issue for many of the candidates that you partner with and support? And how have they grappled with this turnaround in terms of the nationalization of elections that we've seen?
Great question. I've absolutely seen that. And I rarely pay attention, quite frankly, to what goes on in DC. By the time that anything happens in DC gets down to the rest of us, it's usually so watered down that the impact is less and a longer term. So it's a lot longer before we see any direct impact. But your city council, your school board, the Johnson County Community College Board can increase or decrease your taxes tomorrow. They can slash spending for your snowplow. So you can't get out of your driveway tomorrow when it snows. Not that it's going to snow tomorrow, but my point is that I haven't paid attention to federal politics, and I had to begin paying attention after 2016 because we saw a very, very fast knee-jerk reaction at the local level to anti-Trump, and anyone being Republican or having any affiliation with the Republican Party at the local level, even in nonpartisan races, people having a knee-jerk reaction to that. And regardless of the fact that most of our elected officials in Kansas identify with the Republican Party, and our local governments run well, our city councils and our school districts get really high reviews on how they do their job, how they spend their money, the tax rates. But once Trump was elected, we saw a very quick reversal on that. And people wanted to know what their party affiliation was to, when they're asking someone who builds a sidewalk, like there's not a Republican or a Democrat sidewalk, but that question was top of mind. And we lost a lot of really good people, quite frankly, in the state legislature in 2018, specifically due to that question. We lost, the Johnson County delegation was really impacted by that, as well as at the city council and local level, which it shouldn't be. But we've seen some really good public servants that have lost their races due to that polarization at the nonpartisan level.
Absolutely. And I think it speaks to the fact as well that we see such a decline in voters who will support, a president of one party ticket and a representative of another or senate of another. This last election cycle was enlightening. There was only one state where residents of that state voted for two different parties for president and senate, and that was Maine. That used to be a hallmark of our system. And I know that's made it very difficult in a state like Kansas if you're running as a Democrat, or vice versa. If you're running in a state like California as a Republican, that's been something that's been very difficult. In that vein, talking more about kind of disinformation and the impact it has on politics. And this is a question anybody can answer it. I was thinking Congresswoman Davids and Dr. Bollier and Stephanie to a degree. In Kansas, in what ways has our political divide contributed to successes and failures in mitigating COVID specifically? Because it's one thing to have disinformation and the corrosive effect it has on our political landscape, but when you're in the midst of a global pandemic and you have lives that are at stake, and you have disinformation that is spreading like wildfire, that's completely different. And so in what ways has Kansas either risen to that challenge or failed?
I'll just jump in. It was going on today in the State House, sadly, from another physician who was spreading, to me, disinformation about the COVID vaccine and vaccines in general. And when we fail to follow science, and we have a legislator in Johnson County who is spreading disinformation about, today, again, the CDC, and whether that's science or not, and our state health department, we actually can harm people's lives to the point where they end up deceased. And, I look back in the years, I think back to the days when my mother was a child and people stayed home from polio, and days in history when there were actual quarantines and people stayed home and did what they were told to protect everyone else. And yet here we are in a pandemic where people are touting, well, it's my right to not wear a mask, or it's my right to go where I want or have a business open, when that's not been the history of public health in this country before. And it really frightens me. I'm going to stop so other people can answer, but this is a real problem right now.
I think the underlying problem is that we don't agree on what the facts are. You and I, those of us on this call, agree to one set of facts. And there's another segment of the population that believes that we have been brainwashed. And I joke about being intolerant of intolerance, and well, that makes me intolerant. So, where we are with our beliefs, and I believe that the science is accurate, but someone else is hearing a different version of science, and they don't. We no longer have that convening of agreed upon experts, and expertise is now a detriment. Expertise is being considered elitism, or like you're better than everyone else. And we have to figure out how to get back to an agreed set of facts. I think that's the fundamental, the underlying of all of this is that we don't agree on what the facts are.
That's a very solid point, Stephanie, because it makes it very difficult to make progress in a disagreement or in a debate with anybody if you're not operating from the same assumptions, the same set of facts. If you're operating from alternative facts, it's not possible to begin that discussion. Congresswoman Davids, I'm curious, I know that you spent a lot of time early on in the pandemic touting your work and getting PPE to Kansans, being able to streamline bureaucracy on the federal level so that help could be provided to those that were suffering, and making that a key platform. Do you find disinformation to be a distraction in your line of work in Congress? And if so, how? And then also you have colleagues in the House who spread that disinformation and are, actively contributing, particularly when it comes to COVID, with some of just the completely false claims as it relates to the pandemic. And so how do you work with those colleagues as well when they're operating from a completely different set of facts than you are?
Well, all of these questions are complex, I think. I think there are a few different things going on. One is the way that we as electeds communicate out to folks. And actually, when Stephanie was talking about the different, it's multiple different forms of government that are at play here. And, the federal government has this like broad sweeping role to play. And, I do everything I can to advocate for the needs of the 3rd District in Kansas. I also spend, if the rest of the state is suffering, the 3rd District suffers as well. So we have to make sure that we're, the whole delegation came together multiple times in the last Congress, and both parties came together multiple times to pass COVID relief packages for things like the Paycheck Protection Program. And, there were plenty of provisions that were included in those things that in those packages that, were designed to get relief to our state. And so some of that happens regardless of I'm not saying it's optimal, but it continues to move forward, right? Even if I have a fundamental difference with some of my colleagues. And I also think there's the interaction between me and my colleagues. There's the interaction between myself and the constituents of the 3rd District. And it absolutely matters if I'm listening to the experts. And I think, again, Stephanie talked about that sometimes when somebody is an expert in something, people might actually not listen to them for that specific reason. I am not one of those people. I went to law school. I'm a lawyer. I need to listen to public health professionals when it comes to advice about people staying safe. And I think that sometimes that gets lost, that when we talk about misinformation or disinformation, and it can absolutely hinder what we need to do. I do think you feel it more acutely on the local level when we're talking about our state legislature and the interactions that our state legislature has had with our governor, who has really taken a focus on evidence-based, data-based decision-making. I think that those kinds of things have certainly contributed to like the state that we're in now. I also think that it feels to me, and some of this is based on the feedback that we get. It feels to me as though the folks in our community have really done a good job of recognizing the need to look to public health professionals, recognizing the need to adhere to things like distancing and mask wearing. Of course, there are outliers in every community, but I feel like we're on a good track in that space. And then when it comes to the vaccine rollout, I think a lot of folks have worried about. There has been a lot of concern about hesitancy of folks being willing to take the vaccine when it's available to them. And I actually in the 3rd District, we are seeing that it doesn't look like, as the vaccine continues, the rollout continues to ramp up, it doesn't look like we're going to be running into that problem in the same way other places might. So, I in some ways, I feel like our district has, we've got disagreements, but more often than not, it feels like we're coming together around this kind of stuff. And so I feel very fortunate that I get to represent the 3rd district in Kansas. And maybe I wouldn't have gotten elected in a different kind of district, but here it feels like we're able to bridge some of the divides, and it's probably in part because of the conversations that groups like you are having.
Brandon, I might chime in on here for just a second and say, I think one of the key pieces too is figuring out who are the influencers at the local level. So who is it who actually, because we know nationally the influence, the voice of a president or someone else can play a critical role. But I think about wearing masks, and here's a place where I'm going to put in a plug for the faith community. When we have religious leaders who are, and I think had there been a way to bring some of those folks together from the start, sharing information with them, when you go as a pastor to your congregation and say, okay, listen, what does it mean to love your neighbor when you might make your neighbor sick? Well, it might mean wearing a mask. And so this is going to be a part of our Christian discipleship. And there's something about when we bring our faith to bear on things that are uncomfortable for me, like I don't want to wear a mask. And yet at the same time, if I feel like somehow my faith is compelling me to, I'll do it. Even if I'm not convinced of the science, I learned from my faith leader that this is one way of living out my faith. And so I think religious leaders play some role in helping to shape what happens on the ground. I think trusted media people do that when it comes to the news. I think Patrick Mahomes and Chiefs players play a role in that. I think when they were, coming out and talking about Black Lives Matter and about, that irritated some people, but there was a whole lot of people who were willing to listen because it was Patrick Mahomes. So figuring out how do we get at the beginning of something, how do we get the key influencers of the population together to be able to influence their particular constituents. And I think that happened in large part in the 3rd district with religious leaders. And I think there is a role to play for people who have influence over others in shaping how we respond to things like masks and vaccines and other things.
Thank you. And I have a follow-up to that, Pastor, that I think segues very nicely. You mentioned leadership. I think getting back to disinformation in particular, and types of disinformation like conspiracy, like paranoia, which spread rapidly online, and social networks have contributed greatly to that. As somebody who has a flock and a congregation, many families throughout America, including Kansas, have been torn apart because of that disinformation. There's relatives, friends, loved ones who have been swept in by one or more of these types of conspiracy theories or paranoia. And so these families are frustrated and don't know how to engage with a loved one, how to counsel them. What do you suggest? How do you respond when you have a member of your congregation who comes to you and says, my daughter, my brother, my son, is just so insistent on this, he's secluded now from the family, like there's estrangement. How do you counsel those families to engage with those loved ones who have been taken in by one of these untruths, to a degree where it's caused emotional, psychological harm?
It's really hard when you have false information that's presented. We are all by nature wired to look for threats. So we have an amygdala that in our brain that leads us to be paying attention to see what might be a danger to me. And politicians and preachers are masters at playing to our fears. And today we've gotten to the place where we're not even caring about is it even remotely true. We're creating terrible conspiracy ideas that make people afraid. And then we add money to that and resources. So I'll give you an example. I had a guy who sent me a video the other day that was produced, I think, by the Epoch Times, which is a right-wing news media outlet. And it was this video, some of you may have seen it, I'd seen it before during the election, that had a, seemingly very smart guy before a microphone talking about how China is trying to take over America and communism. The Communist Party of China is trying to, circumvent this, and they've supported President, Biden. And you get this whole 6-minute, video that had to have cost $100,000 to produce, and it was, or more, and it was then sent out virally. And this member of our congregation sent this to me and said, before they take this down, you need to watch this, Pastor Adam. I'm really worried about this, and I'd seen it before and I watched it, and I wrote him back and I said, hey, you know, I love you so much. I really care about you. And I can see how you could be really afraid of this. And I'll just tell you, I've looked into these different things, and I don't think any part of this is true. This is my assessment. And I'm just telling you, you know, I know it's easy to be afraid. I just, as best as I could, I've looked into these things, and I don't want you to be afraid. This is a slick piece of marketing that is not capturing the truth. And he wrote me back and he said, you know, Pastor Adam, thank you so much for not saying I was crazy or on the fringe or treating me like I was an idiot, because everybody else who I sent this to wrote back with insulting comments, and you told me you loved me and you were calm and you didn't make fun of me, and then you helped me. And he said, I'm 80 years old and I don't know where to go for the truth. And when somebody sent this to me, it seems so true. I didn't know what to do. So thank you for helping me realize this isn't true. I mean, sometimes it's that kind of response as opposed to what we want to say is you're an idiot for even remotely thinking this is true. And so I found that plays an important role, is that sort of calming, you know, presence when you're talking about these things. Sometimes I've written people back when I got a social media or a email that went to 100 people, and I've said, you know, I learned that, you know, in one of these during the campaign, if a Biden's elected, we're going to lose our religious freedoms. We're going to become socialist. We're going to all these things. And I'm like, look, I don't care if you're voting Republican or Democrat, but I do want you to know, as a religious leader, I care very much about religious freedom. And I have zero fear that if President Biden gets elected, we're going to lose our religious freedoms. This is simply not accurate. And I want to encourage, I sent this to the person who sent it out, and I said, I just want to encourage you. I'm okay if you're a Republican or Democrat, you know, wherever you're voting, but we just can't send out misinformation. QAnon, I included in my pastor's e-note a couple of month and a half ago. So folks, I just need you to know these things, they are not true. They are just simply not true. I have researched them. I want you to understand that these are harming people, that people are being harmed by these things. And this is simply not factual information. And so I think there's a place for us to do that without insulting other people, but to be able to, and to have those kind of conversations and gently be able to say, and sometimes very firmly to be able to say, this is just not true. And you know, I've researched it, and here are the facts. And if again, if we're you know, if the influencers are unwilling to say that, then where are they going to hear that? And these other things seem so compelling. And when you're already afraid, and all of us, I don't care, Democrat, Republican, liberal, or conservative, we all have a tendency to be afraid and to buy into a conspiracy theory if we're not careful. So we have to use the intellect and have good sources of information to slow us down and say, well, wait a minute, I know I'm afraid, but maybe I shouldn't really be afraid of this.
And Brandon, if I could add to that, this is not me, but I wanted to make sure that people had the link to Adam's sermon series. During the election, there was a great sermon series called Love Your Neighbor. And he went through each week, here's some things that you can do when you're approached with somebody who's like this or who's saying this. And he didn't tell me to do this, but I'm going to put the link to that in the chat section. And I just highly encourage it, because we watched it religiously.
Thank you so much, Stephanie.
That's perfect. And I appreciate that, because it is all about the approach, Pastor, as you said. So since we're coming up on time, I want to close out by giving everybody an opportunity to discuss solutions. So solutions to partisan gridlock and dysfunction, solutions to the disinformation and paranoia that has become a hallmark of our media landscape, solutions to partisanship and polarization and tribalism. So I'd like to start with this question, Stephanie, and then everybody else can feel free to answer in terms of solutions that you see to any or all of these, because they're all intertwined. I think none of these issues exist in isolation. So there are solutions, but Stephanie, going back to 2020, moderate Republicans lost big in Kansas in the August primaries. We now have a legislature in Kansas that is controlled by very extreme conservatives. We have that loss of a moderate faction, which makes governing more difficult. So I'm curious to see, what solutions do you see to end gridlock? There's a lot that's talked about nationally in terms of ranked choice voting, nonpartisan blanket primaries, different political solutions to the gridlock we see. Are there any Kansas-centric solutions that you think might be a possibility here?
You know, I've tried for years to impress upon moderates the importance of voting in primaries, and I've spent 20 years of my career doing that. And we've been successful twice that I can think of, 2002, due in large part to the Montoy school lawsuit, and then in 2016, due in large part to the Gannon school lawsuit. And what happens is people get in, we elect a moderate legislature, and they go in and fix things. You know, they fix school funding and fix transportation and fix the budget, made it more sustainable and solvent. And then people get bored and go back to their own, you know, they have better things to do than uphold this constant energy around voting in primaries. And so I really think that the electoral process is going to have to change. And I don't know, I don't think it's constitutional. I think it's a statutory change, but to change how we vote in Kansas in terms of the primaries. One thing we could do is open the primary process, and Kansas has locked or closed primaries where you have to be registered Republican or Democrat to vote on that ballot. And the parties have the opportunity to open up those primaries. The party apparatus votes whether to have an open or a closed primary. And in my mind, that's a natural conflict legally, because if I'm an unaffiliated voter, I'm paying taxes to run this election, but I don't get to vote in it. An unaffiliated voter can walk into the polls and say, I want to vote a Republican ballot, but they have to change to that party. So they walk in unaffiliated and they walk out Republican or Democrat. I think that's a serious legal question from a taxpayer perspective, but the parties aren't going to change their open and closed system. It benefits them. It reinforces the two-party system that they have power over. So we're going to have to do something legislatively, and how you get legislators to vote against a system that retains their own power is problematic. So I don't know what the solution is, unless there's a legal challenge, which I would like to see.
Right, and I want, since we are over time, any of our panelists who do have to jump off, I want to give them the opportunity to just give some concluding remarks, particularly around solutions. If any that are hard for time want to jump in, please do so.
I gotta go. I'm gonna be quick. Catch people being good if we can. I try my very best. When there is someone that traditionally doesn't seem to do the right thing, when they do the right thing, let's thank them and be public about it. And I would love to also ask leadership, particularly in the State House, and I will call them out by name: Ty Masterson, the Senate President, and Ron Reichman, the Speaker of the House. Could we just please try to be positive instead of always attacking the governor? Surely someone who the majority of Kansas elected is doing something right some of the time. And let's ask them to also catch one another being good. Let's start the process, and I think we could maybe see some change as we start to like each other again. Sorry, I've got to run. Thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Bollier. Congresswoman Davids, in terms of solutions, do you see this? Are there any solutions you see on the legislative level, policy-wise, or is this more just our communities that you see these solutions needing to occur?
So I think I do think that there probably are policy type of solutions that we could look at. Things like, getting like outside influence in terms of like huge amounts of money that gets spent, making sure that people can cast their ballot, that it's counted, that when something goes wrong, that there's recourse for that. I do think that there are some policy solutions to how we ended up with like a very extreme legislature, or we've got some members in the U.S. House that are pretty extreme, and I do think there are some policy solutions, but I actually think that probably the more like the deeper solution, and and I don't even know that I would call it a solution. And I'm not sure if the work is ever really done. But I think that when it comes to like real change, from where we are now to where we can be in terms of a healthier society, in terms of a more connected community, I don't think that that's a policy thing. I think that some of what we've been talking about tonight, had some of the themes that we've heard, or listening to each other, are showing up in a way that's in some instances non-judgmental. And I think that some of what ends up happening is that there are some topics that for some people it like touches the core of who they are. When someone is scared that about the idea of religious freedom, it's probably not going to be the easiest thing to have a rational down the line point A, point B, point C type of conversation, when like a person's faith is often like a core piece of their identity. And to ask somebody to have a rational conversation about policy when you're talking about something that's very, very deep, this is not an easy thing to do. And that's not a policy issue. That's a how do we learn to communicate with each other issue. And I think that Pastor Hamilton, I'm not going to share the whole thing, but I actually was thinking that we had a good conversation not that many days ago, in the wake of the January 6th attack on the Capitol. And we talked about trauma and the ways that can impact a person's ability to engage on a topic, just like the day-to-day functioning of human beings. And, we talk about Congress, we talk about the state legislature, we talk about our county commissions or city councils. These are institutions, but they're all filled with humans. And I think the more we can see each other as human beings and recognize that we might not agree on something, and that's okay, but also sometimes things evoke a lot of emotion out of people, and that is something we don't really learn how to navigate, I think. So there are policy solutions, and there are other things that we can all be doing together as a community.
Yeah, very good points. Yeah, I think we look at potential solutions here. It's active listening, community-driven approach, recognizing that, and recognizing people's inherent value and worth outside of labels. It's very easy to get caught up in political labels and political boxes and whether or not somebody checks a political box, but we are multidimensional and far much more than a label. So I appreciate all of you being here tonight. I know we're over time, so we will conclude our program. This was great discussion, great panel. Thank you for being here again. Thank you to Michael Popa, Executive Director of Mainstream, and Mainstream staff for putting this together and for starting this conversation that needs to happen. And hopefully we see this spread to other communities, and this is only the beginning of solutions.
Brandon, thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Brandon, for moderating this conversation. As we've seen here tonight, there's not just one answer to how we're going to move forward, right? But but all of us, stop listening to respond and starting to listen to understand, I think is maybe one of the first steps. I heard that a lot tonight. I'd also like to thank everyone that came out tonight, especially our members and donors. Without your support, Mainstream Coalition and our voter engagement affiliate, the Voter Network, would not be able to do the work we do. To those of you who are not yet members, next month we'll be hosting a conversation on diversity, equity, and inclusion with Kansas Governor Laura Kelly, among other guests. And that event will be for members only. So if you are not and you want to be, get on mainstreamcoalition.org and check us out. Thank you again for all your attention tonight, and go in peace.